Greeting, friends. Welcome to Soul Empowerment, down-to-earth tips, insights, and inspirations for an empowered life. We're here today, myself, David McLeod, your life mastery coach, Nancy Stevens, and Stephanie Benedetto Padovani. I hope I'm saying that correctly. We are your soul empowerment guides, and we hope to help you find your way to a better life. Nancy, why don't you start and tell us a little bit about who you are and what brings you here today? Where are you today as well?
Hey, I am in just outside of Nashville, Tennessee, in Brentwood, about 20 minutes from Nashville. I work as a life coach for women who are seeking to find and own their authentic voice on their terms, and I enjoy sharing and teaching and being present. I just think it's so important for all of us, which is why we're doing this show, to really connect with the true essence of our soul, which is our voice. And I do that here and in the work I do as a life coach.
Awesome. So glad you could be here with us today.
Thank you.
And Stephanie, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and your wild, creative nature.
That about sums it up, David. So I am a wild creation coach and soul storyteller. And what the heck that means is that I help creative entrepreneurs, in particular coaches and healers and people who want to create something but aren't sure exactly what they'd like to create from a place of joy. I help them to do that, and also to tell their stories, to broadcast a powerful message that transforms the world. So I get to have a lot of fun with it. And that's part of what we'll be doing here. I'm like, oh, what are we going to create today in this conversation? What can we create and explore?
Well, we're about to find that out. And I am David McLeod. I am your life mastery coach, an author, speaker, facilitator. And what do I do? I try to help people get under the surface of some of the things that might be holding them back or keeping them from having a great life. And I help them to find the gold that's inside so that they can bring that forth and transform their lives into a real, what I call a work of art, a priceless treasure, a masterpiece. And that's really what I'm interested in doing. And part of that work is, I wrote a book recently called A Life to Die For, which is really all about my whole life mastery concepts and how they all work. And this show actually is based to a large extent on the contents of that book. And that's what we're here to do. Nancy and Stephanie have graciously agreed to help support me in that process. And today we're talking about a really important topic, I think, certainly one of the more important topics in life, and that's all about choice. And the questions that we want to ask are pretty deep. What is choice? Where does choice show up? How much choice do we actually have? How much free will do we have in making our choices? All those kinds of questions we want to look at today and see what comes out of it. We don't have a specific agenda, although we do have a few bullet points that we want to get to, but that's the nature of our presentation here. It's kind of a conversation. So I'm just going to open up the floor, and let's start with that first question. What exactly is choice anyway?
This is such a question. Who's going to take it? And actually, you, as you are listening and watching, you are invited to participate as well. What is choice to you? So, you know what? Since I'm talking and there's a space here, when I think about choice, I think about it as choice being this experience of there being a space wherein I can create something, wherein I can say yes to something or no to something. And I think the reason I'm saying it that way is because I don't know what that really is. But it seems to me that I can, So Joanna says something really beautiful that's much more straightforward than what I just said. She said, "It is my choice first, then it is a choice that frees me." What is choice? It is my choice first. It's like, I'm not a victim of what's happening to me. There is something that I can choose that frees me from feeling as if I am the victim of my circumstances, that empowers me to create something different, or to participate in something in a different way than just reacting without choosing.
Yeah. I think, so for me, what I have noticed about choice is that there are two different aspects, I think, to choice. First, there is an awareness that comes about what are the options I have available to me in any given moment. And every moment presents a whole slew of new options. And then the choice is the action I take in order to move towards one option or another, and maybe to avoid other options that don't appeal to me for whatever reason. So that's really how I see choice. Choice is the active process of moving towards one of a number of options. And so I think it's important to make the distinction between the options that are available and the choice that we actually make. There's a completely different kind of energy associated with them. In the first case, when you're just becoming aware, you're opening yourself up to possibilities. You're opening yourself up and you're saying, what is there for me right now? And sometimes the options may not be all that pleasant. Sometimes those options may seem like, oh my God, I don't like that, I don't like that, I don't like that. So you have to choose what seems like what we call the lesser of multiple evils. And that happens to all of us. You know, we all get stuck in that situation from time to time where we're looking at the options and we say, not so crazy about any of them. And yet I feel like I have to make a choice. I have to choose one of them. And even if I make the choice not to choose one of them, I'm effectively choosing anyway. So this cycle of options showing up and then moving towards an option, I think, is a pretty good descriptor of the process of choosing. And how you choose, I believe, is a reflection of who you are being in that moment. Because today I might choose X, and tomorrow, because I've shifted or grown or evolved or done something in my life, I may choose Y instead of X. That's kind of an interesting overall process of life, I think. Nancy, what do you think?
Wow, you guys have put a lot of heavy stuff out there. I believe, everything that you've said. I think that also choice is who you believe you are at the moment, based on the options that are out there. What I may lean into, thinking that that's my only choice. It's a facet of where I am on that day, or my belief of what I think I am. That, these choices are black and white, or I can only choose that, or I can't choose that, because based on my own known or unknown belief system. But choices are, as you said, they're very empowering. It's a life force, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's a life force. Yeah.
I think there was a really interesting distinction that just came up in the chat that Joanna pointed out, which is that it's not just about an action that we choose, but we can choose an emotional response to a stimuli. And what I was thinking is, we can also choose, or it seems that we can. I'm saying that deliberately because I'm like, I really don't know, but I like not knowing. So we can choose how we show up in a particular situation. So we can choose
Yeah.
maybe that's like attitude or outlook or what we're looking for. We can choose our attention, what we're putting our attention and awareness on, what we're choosing to feed and what we're not, perhaps.
Yeah. Hey, Marilyn, I'm so glad you were able
Hi.
to join us today. This is just a conversation with the three of us. Would you mind just, turning off your camera? And you're welcome to, add comments and stuff in the chat. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Hey, Marilyn.
Hi.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Stephanie. What were you saying?
I think I kind of finished saying what I was saying, and
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I'm not 100% convinced that I get to choose my emotions. I am 100% convinced that I get to choose how I respond to those emotions. I have the choice about whether I want to continue to engage in a particular emotion or not. That much I have choice over. But sometimes I find, this may or may not be true for you, but I've noticed in my own life that sometimes emotions just show up. And it's not as if I said, oh, I think I'm going to choose to feel this or that or something else. I just noticed that energy starts moving within me. And I take it as an opportunity to look into myself and to say, okay, what is that emotion about? Especially if it's an emotion that we typically characterize as unpleasant or negative. And I don't like either of those words. I mean, I think all emotional energy is neither negative nor unpleasant. It's just what it is, and how we respond to it determines its pleasantness or its negativity. So I think in that sense, the choice is about, it's like having thoughts in my head. When thoughts simply arise out of the ether of mind, whatever that is. And sometimes my thoughts are pleasant thoughts, sometimes they're not so pleasant. And when that happens, I have the choice about whether I choose, whether I can continue to engage those thoughts and think about them, or whether I can just let them pass out of my system. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, it's very powerful and life affirming. And I kind of go back to that believing, or the beliefs that you hold within at that time in your life, that you think you are allowed, that you have multiple choices, or the belief that the only thing that you have is what's in front of you, like with blinders on.
Right.
Yeah, so,
I need to mute you, Marilyn. Your microphone is coming through.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
The facet of that, I guess, what also defines choice is self-awareness. If we're not self-aware, or if we're developing self-awareness, then the fabric of all the layers of what choice is may or may not be present at that time. So it's, I guess, choice is a dynamic fabric that's constantly weaving itself into our lives according to the season of awareness or what's at hand. And I like what you shared, that emotions just pop up. And with that self-awareness piece, aware of that emotion, maybe that's when we have the choice to respond to it, or rush right into it, or react.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I like Joanna's question. She says, at what point do you need to wake up to the choice? And I first of all, I would reframe the question. I don't think I ever need to wake up. It's a choice that I make, to wake up as well. But that's just me and my semantic monkey mind. And I'm just saying that. But yes, I agree. The option is there to look at whatever is happening, to become aware of whatever is happening, or not. I can choose, again, always choice in every single moment. I can choose to ignore what's happening and pretend that things around me aren't the way they are. And I hate to say this, but a lot of us tend to do that in many different areas of our lives. Our ego minds come up and make up all kinds of stories about what really is. And so our ideas may not be reflective of what actually is true in our lives. And so sometimes we may be making choices based on a false understanding of what's really going on. And that's coming from ego mind, not necessarily from the truth of our soul. And this is why I think it's really important to go back to the basics and get into awareness. What is really happening? What am I really seeing? What am I really experiencing? And then from there, making a more empowered and more informed choice that's relevant and expresses the truth of who I really am.
Yeah, and guess what? Doing that, you have to make a choice. You have to make a choice to go beneath the surface and allow that to come up rather than stuffing it down or denying it or saying that where I'm at is not, life is chosen, this has been chosen for me.
Mm-hmm.
But choice is very, like I said, empowering. Once we have crafted a thought or a mindset that it is the essence of what makes us alive, rather than being afraid of choices or I'm overwhelmed, or this is too much, or I don't have all the information, or maybe reframing the capacity of what choice is in our life.
I love watching you cogitate there, Stephanie.
I'm very right now.
I'm like, So I'm wondering if any of us have a particular choice or example of a place where we're either using choice or not using choice that we'd like to explore. Either one of us or one of our participants who'd like to share. Is there an area of your life where you're either challenged around choice or noticing, I feel like I'm choosing here and here I'm not choosing. What's different about that? There's a thought experiment that comes up, and I'm calling it a thought experiment deliberately because sometimes if we are faced with what looks like so many choices, or we think about infinite choices and infinite possibilities, it can become overwhelming. And then we can go, or I'll speak for myself, I can go into a story of choosing the right thing. And sometimes it's helpful for me to think, what if there is no decision to be made? What if there is no need to get it right or wrong? It's simply what I choose. If I didn't have to worry about right or wrong, what would be doing itself through me? Which is a little bit different, just to take the pressure off of this idea of choosing something that can either be right or wrong, and if I get it wrong, there are all these horrible consequences.
Well, I think, first of all, let's talk about the right or wrong bit, because I think that we hold ourselves hostage a lot by going back and dwelling on past choices and making ourselves wrong for having chosen something that may have had consequences that we didn't intend. And the reality is, I believe, for most human beings who are, reasonably conscious individuals who are looking, most of us, I believe, are really decent people. Most of us don't go out of our way to deliberately make choices that cause problems for other people or even for ourselves. Most of us don't do that. The truth, I believe, is that most of us make our choices with all of the information that we think we have available to us in that moment. And as a reflection of who we are in that moment, we choose accordingly, right? Now, sometimes the choice may result in consequences that are not desirable, that are things that we regret, all that stuff. And it's not possible to undo a choice. The choice is already done. However, there is possibility here to choose to honor ourselves for the choice we made based on the truth of who we were in that moment, and to simply say, great, now what can I learn from that choice, and how can I choose going forward? That's what I believe. I think it's all about, first of all, stop beating yourself up. That's the first thing I would say. Don't beat yourself up for any of your past choices. Simply go back, observe them, and say, yeah, I made the best decision I could with the information I had at that time. It resulted in something that I'm not so proud of. Now, what can I do about the results? Well, I can go back and I can make amends with people. I can go back and apologize. I can go back and clean things up. I can do that. Those are choices, but those, even though I'm thinking about stuff that happened in the past, I am moving forward to deal with the consequences of those choices. That's the thing. I'm never stuck in the past when I do that. I simply say, okay, that's the choice I made. It had this impact. I can now go to you, Stephanie, or you, Nancy, or whoever I happen to wrong, and I can say, look, I am really sorry about the consequence I created. I see that I wasn't thinking through all the details. I see that I didn't have all the information, whatever the truth might be. And I'm promising you now that I want to fix this, and I want to make better choices going forward. That's how I see it.
Mm-hmm. Woo, that's a lot.
You asked me what I was getting excited about, Stephanie. I think that was one of the things right there.
Nice. Like
yeah.
it.
Yeah, and I like your comment, Joanna, that you say that with some that are in the process of developing that choice is subconscious when they don't have the same level of understanding of the process. Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and think about that for a minute. How many of us make unconscious choices? I think we all do. In fact, we all do it all the time.
Yeah.
Because here's an example. I mean, if you're going to drive your car, my guess is you're not thinking about every aspect of driving your car. Or even if you go out for a walk, you're not thinking about every aspect of walking, like you're getting your brain to move this muscle, to move that foot, to move, and so forth. You're not thinking about stuff like that. All of that is pushed back into our subconscious, and it happens on an autopilot. So we can do things while we're on autopilot that can have an impact on people around us, right? So we're still responsible for those choices, even though we were doing them unconsciously. And that's the most important thing for us to remember. We have to take responsibility for all of our choices, no matter whether we were aware of them or not. That's something that a lot of people aren't willing to do. And that's something that I try to teach my clients. Take responsibility. That doesn't mean you beat yourself up for it. It just simply means that you own it. Yep, I made that choice. Okay, now what are we going to do about it now? You know, I like to think of a choice as kind of like throwing a rock into a pond. The moment I release that rock, it's gone. I cannot unthrow the rock. But I can throw another rock, or I can do something different besides throwing a rock that, you know, may create a different kind of reality for me. Do you see what I'm saying? So every choice has its own ripple effect and will continue to have its own ripple effect, perhaps indefinitely. The question is, can I compensate with new choices? That's the thing. How do I repair any damage that I've created, or amplify something that I really liked that was created? How do I do that? And it's all about bringing consciousness to the choice so that we're not doing so much stuff unconsciously.
Well, I think that it's actually quite appropriate, beautiful, and useful that so much of our being and doing is actually unconscious, because it's only when we have, it's really only this idea of choice really comes up when there's something that looks like a problem or a challenge, or I'm like, all of a sudden I can make a better choice or a poorer choice. Unlike when I just open the door, I just open the door. It doesn't occur to me that there's a better or worse way to open the door. I just do it because I want to go through it and I know how to do it. Now, there are better, we could argue there are better and worse ways to go through the door. I could pick up a hatchet and chop my way through, or I could use this thing called the doorknob and turn it. But it's only when there are consequences of picking up the hatchet and now, I can't close the door, or my roommate is now angered at me because I destroyed a door, that I go, I actually could choose something different there. So there's this really funny thing about how useful. I'm sorry, I can't address this like in a straightforward fashion. I think today. My goodness, I'm not capable of it. It's like, I like this question that Joanna asks around how do you or when do you become conscious about choice? So instead of there are areas of our lives where we're living on autopilot, where we're just doing what is conditioned, where if we can become mindful and pause and recognize there's another way to do it, it usually isn't until there's some kind of a problem or challenge or difficulty that arises within ourselves or our environment or relationships that we might be inclined to do that. However, we can do that at any moment. If we become more present with what's happening, it may start to happen automatically. And I think that we can do this with tools like mindfulness, just becoming more present, or meditation, where we start to just notice what's happening. And it comes back to that Viktor Frankl quote that I've brought up a couple times in this topic, and I'll read it just so that I get it right. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And so there is this opportunity in becoming more mindful and creating and noticing that space, because the space is there, but it's only useful if we notice it, that space between what happens and what arises in us as the response, and what we're choosing consciously or unconsciously, what's happening and moving through us. And if we just notice that little sliver of a space, then we become more aware of our role in that choice and find freedom in it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Yep. That's beautiful. And, I just wanted to draw attention to something. I noticed as you were saying unconscious choice, and I've been doing this too. I use the phrase unconscious choice. I suspect that might be inaccurate terminology, because unless we're dead, we're not making unconscious choices. We are making choices on autopilot. We're making choices coming from our subconscious mind, but the subconscious is not unconscious. And I think we've got to be careful about our terminology.
Okay. So like
I'm not trying to make you wrong, by the way. I noticed that I was doing the same thing. So
there's a reason that actually I was trained to use the word unconscious rather than subconscious, and it was through my neurolinguistic programming training, wherein we talked about the conscious mind. So this is the critical faculty of which we are aware, the thoughts of which we are aware, the contents of our minds of which we are aware, and everything else is like the iceberg underneath the water, right? The vast unconscious, the things that are happening in our mind that of which we are unaware because it's only this small. So therefore it's unconscious. And to use that term unconscious rather than subconscious, because if we're going to get into technicalities, sub implies that it's lesser. Un just means not conscious. So it's not below.
Right, but I understand where it's coming from. Yeah. And I'm just saying, what you use two other words, which I think are far more appropriate. One is awareness. I'm either aware of my choices or I'm not. And when I'm not aware of them, that's when we imagine that they're unconscious, but that they're not really unconscious. They're just happening at a low level, whether we call it subconscious, unconscious, some other form of consciousness. There's a way in which all my autopilot choices are happening consciously but without my awareness. That I would agree with. And I was just bringing attention to it because I tend to be a little bit kind of semantically oriented, as you probably noticed. Words to me have specific meanings, and I try to find the easiest way to be clear about what I'm trying to say. So I just noticed that. I thought I'd put it out there. You may or may not agree. Your mileage may vary. It's all good.
Well,
Nancy, you wanted to say something.
What I think is fascinating is everything that's going on right now with social distancing, the coronavirus pandemic. You know, there's some can say, I have no choice. This has been handed down to me. It cut off my other choices. That can be a very easy way to think, you know, if you are just living on the surface that, what I'm doing right now has been chosen for me. I didn't choose this. This was chosen. I guess you could say at some level that's true. We are, for the sake of being safe and flattening the curve, we are being asked, all of us, to social distance and take all those measures. But then there's a whole other aspect to go deeper is, what am I choosing to gather from this? What is my choice with what is taking place? Is my choice to see it as an ending, an opening, a beginning, a reframing? So all of these collective bits about what type of choice we can make have opened up. So I have been playing with that. There's, I guess, the black and white, this has been chosen for me, or wow, look at all the choices now available to me to process this and to be in this social distancing pandemic.
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank you for bringing up that topic. I think that it's obviously it's very relevant to our time right now. Everybody's experiencing that. And I've thought about this myself. The government suggested the idea of shelter in place. They kind of mandated it. There were depending on where you live, there may be laws in place to enforce it. But ultimately, I still have the choice about whether or not to abide by that law, whether or not to actually stay home, whether or not to actually honor the 6-foot distance between other people. Those are choices I still have. Now, if I choose to ignore the mandate and go about my business as if those mandates didn't exist, there will be consequences. Somebody may not like the fact that I'm doing that, and I may get arrested. So that is a possible consequence of my choice to ignore the existing rule. So, and this is true, I think, in every kind of thing. Even if a guy has a gun to my head and is telling me to do something, I still have a choice about whether or not to comply. And I may be thinking in my head, if I comply, I may stay alive. If I don't comply, he's probably going to kill me. That might be the thought process that's going on in my head. So it seems like there's no choice at all. But think about it. How many times have people made choices that seem like there were no choices, and they simply refused to accept that that was the only choice available and chose something else? Many times, some great things come out of that. Many times. Now, that's not to say I would not recommend, arguing with a guy with a gun to your head saying, yeah, I'm not going to comply with what you have to say. Just taking a chance that he might not be serious about pulling that trigger. That's not worth it. The risk is too great, right? On the other hand, some of us have this belief that death is just a transition. It's not, there is no such thing as real death. So if this is the way I'm meant to end the existence of my physical body, so be it. I'm going to continue being true to who I am. Do you see? There's many, many choices in every single moment, no matter what it may appear like to our ego mind. And, even though somebody else may be making a choice and it feels like I have to abide by that choice, I still have the option to to look into myself and say, what is the truth about who I am right now? Now, in my case, I talked about the whole COVID-19, the social distancing. I have chosen to abide by those rules. Not so much because I think that there's a real risk of me getting the disease or somebody getting the disease from me, but I just want to be sure that I'm doing my part to help minimize the chance of this disease spreading. That's my choice. Now, your choice may be different. Your reason, your rationale, your idea for staying home or abiding by these rules may differ from mine, but that's how I am choosing to look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it presents a whole, yeah, you're right. People within the parameters that have been handed down, I've seen it. People are choosing to make their choice how to live in that parameter or give themselves other choice options. But yeah, I'm just really fascinated by the complexity of human character now more than ever. During this time of social distancing, what you said, I can abide by what has been handed down for the safety of all of us, or I can choose to say, I'm going to do my own thing anyway. And I've certainly actually seen that where we live.
I've seen a few people doing it too, yeah.
Or people, I know we're getting off topic, but yeah, it's been requested to start wearing masks and maybe gloves when you're out in public. And it's a choice. It's a request. And people are choosing to do that or not to do that.
Yeah,
I think that's fascinating,
yeah,
of how they see themselves in this time. Like, what is my choice? How am I choosing to be? So so maybe everyone's unconscious rebels or compliance is coming out. That is, because it certainly is. That is really interesting. Who are we? We are all making choices right now.
Yep. And I don't think we're getting off topic here, by the way. I think this is very much in alignment with our topic of choice. So, yeah, don't apologize if you think we're getting off topic. This is perfect. This is going exactly where it needs to go. This is called spontaneous creation based on inputs from some really wise people. That's what I call it. And so now Stephanie is about to just prove me correct in that statement.
Oh, the pressure's on now. I was thinking about that question. A couple questions, actually, that occurs to me that can be useful when it comes to choice. So, like, what if we ask the question in any given situation, whether it's in this current climate in which we find ourselves, or if it's some area of our life where we feel challenged around choice and knowing what to do, what else can I choose? So there's what we're aware of, and then there's what we're not yet aware of that's also possible, which, as David, as you're pointing out, there are infinite number of possibilities. Now, a lot of times I fall into the false dichotomy of there are two things I can do. I can choose this or I can choose this. And there are an infinite number of variables within them. Even within those two choices, yes or no, I can say yes or I can say no to this thing. There are all these different ways in which I can choose to show up differently. And so for me, asking that question, what else can I choose? Or how else can I choose? Maybe opens up something else that I haven't seen. And there was an example of this that just hit me this morning. I've been recognizing that there's something that I'm creating around storytelling. And there's something that I've allowed myself to see and choose fully. And then I realized, oh, there's a part of this, like I've been allowing myself to, and been choosing to engage in this in a very playful and lighthearted way that's very fun. But what I've not been owning, what I've been choosing not to own, is the kind of impact that I'd like to have with that. In order to keep it light and keep it playful, I've been going, oh, but I'm not taking it seriously. And also, there are all these things around it of which I cannot control. So I'll out myself here. And what I'd really like to do, this is useful for me personally, so thank you for indulging me. Hi, I have the space. So what I'd really like to do is use storytelling and have events and do them internationally in a way that create life-changing impact for people. Stories that I tell for and with people and facilitate people in telling that allow them to change their lives and make a huge difference in the world as a result. Now, there are certain things that I can choose and I have control over. This gets into what I can control and what I can't, right? I can control my choices to set up an event, invite people to it, and I can control what I do at that event. But I have absolutely no control over how that's received. I have no control over whether that actually changes people's lives or not. Right. And that is like, whoa, if I acknowledge that I actually desire this impact, but I cannot directly create that, it requires this thing, which I might call unattached desire, like the desire to be this thing, to have this thing, to do this thing, with the awareness that I can't make it happen. I can only do my part in creating it. And right. Trust, that's where the surrender is. Trust that whatever happens, so I can have these events, and it may not go exactly the way I desire. It may not have the impact that I hope it does, but each event I can learn from it. Each event I can choose to notice what works and what doesn't, what brings people, what seems to create more meaning and depth for people, and what seems to take them away from it. And I can learn and grow and change my own behavior and change the environment and change the invitations and invite different people in order to get closer and closer to that thing that I'm asking for. So there's always this balance of what can I choose and what is outside of my control. And what we choose, what is within our control creates our experience of reality, whether the world is beautiful and full of hope and love, or it's full of pain and misery.
Right. Well, you bring up a great topic. I mean, the whole concept of control, that could be an issue unto itself. I think what I have noticed in my life is there is very little over which I actually have control, even though my ego mind seems to think it can control everything. Mm-hmm. And what I have come to the way I have resolved this in myself is I've tried to eliminate the word control from my vocabulary. And instead, what I ask myself is, what can I influence? Influence seems to be a more appropriate term. I mean, I can put myself out there and I can move my energy in a particular direction. I can enroll people. I can do all kinds of things like that. But ultimately, that influence is not the same as control. It may help shape the reality that I'm trying to create, and it may help other people to grow into the people that they're meant to be and so forth. But ultimately, control, I don't think really exists. I think it's an illusion of the ego mind. Mm-hmm. So that's how I choose to try it. That's how I choose to hold it as much as possible. Now, that doesn't mean to say I don't still try and take control, okay? There are times when my ego mind gets so strong that I just simply try to push my way around and I start becoming almost bully-like in nature in my desire to have control of that situation. And that only happens when the fear inside me has reached a level where I think that, there's something that's going to be unsafe for me or the people I love or whatever. And so I'm doing all this stuff out of a reaction mode rather than from a response place. I'm not taking that pause. I'm not looking at that space between stimulus and response like you were talking about before. When I can quiet that ego mind and get down to that place where I'm more calm, The situation may not have changed at all, but now I can start bringing influence in place rather than trying to control things.
I like that. And that kind of, David, that kind of ties in. I'm reading a comment from Melissa, who shares that one of her reasons for being on our soul empowerment today is for insight on building confidence in choices, finding my truth, and making choices to support that.
Right.
I'm moved to share a distinction that has been helpful to me in this. So if this is something that you've been challenged with, and I think probably all of us have at some point, how do I know what to choose? How do I become more confident in trusting what I know? So this is something that I think we have to answer for ourselves, how we know what we know. But there's a distinction. And one is this, it's kind of like we have two devices. And I'll borrow this metaphor from Michael Neal, whom I love dearly. He talks about there are these two devices that give us different kinds of feedback. And one is our inner GPS. It's how we know what we know. It's like our inner compass. And it's this feeling of this knowing of yes, no. And sometimes I don't know yet, right? So it's like, am I choosing this? What am I choosing? And there's an inner knowing. It's usually somewhere in your body that you would know in some way. Like if you can think of a time when you just knew. And it wasn't about thinking, and it didn't necessarily even make sense. You just knew. That feeling is almost neutral. Now, there's a feeling or sensation in your body, but as far as emotions, you may have lots of emotions around it, but the knowing itself is just a knowing. It's almost like we could think of it as binary, like yes, no. That's our inner GPS. That's how we know what we know. And then we have these things called feelings, emotions that move through us all the time. And I know for me, they are constantly changing. It is like the weather. So I often get confused, and I think that my emotions are an indicator of whether or not I'm following my GPS, and they are not. My emotions are an indicator of the thinking that's moving through my weather system, right? So if I have a thought of, wow, this is such a beautiful day, it comes with this really beautiful feeling. But if I have this thought, it's cloudy and miserable and rainy out, it comes with another feeling. And it has nothing to do with my inner knowing. However, these feelings are useful because they act as the second type of device, which is a homing device. Usually when I'm stuck in what we might call an unpleasant or negative feeling, a feeling that, it's not, it kind of has a heaviness or an ick to it, it's letting me know that I'm having thinking that's creating this thought, and I'm probably spending more time in that thinking. It's an indicator to come back to what's happening here in the present. It's a homing device. It's like saying, Stephanie, come home. Come home, Stephanie. Come home. And it doesn't mean I'm either on or off track. And I think that the more I learn to trust that knowing, even when I'm in an emotional storm cloud, the easier it goes for me. Because we're not supposed to feel good all the time. As David was pointing out, it seems to me too that emotions just come and thinking just comes and it also goes. The knowing is there. And if there's a lot of thinking and feeling, I might not be in touch with it. Something I like to say to clients sometimes is trust what you know, trust yourself, trust your intuition, even if it's wrong. Because it really, like just trust what you know, period.
Yeah, that is so true. We make the choice to bypass the intuition based on the playing field of supposed facts and stats that we sometimes negate this knocking at our door. That is our inner knowing that's really has our best interest of learning, in thinking that, the other things out there are more important for me to base my truth on and to feel confident. And so with you, Melissa, it is fascinating that we often use the parameter of our thoughts and feelings as a indicator of the choice that is clear for us to go into, bypassing that inner foundational core that we all have. Maybe at times it's covered or fuzzy or buried, but it's always there. And I've learned that myself. In the calm, when I'm not distracted, then I can really give myself the ability to have a more full option of choices, rather than the one that I might have thought, oh, this is it, based on this emotional sensation or this feeling sensation or thought. Oh, wait a minute. Something else is here that's maybe more grounding and relevant, that's always been there.
Right.
Now, it's a beautiful piece.
I think that so there's a lot of good stuff here, and I think there's a dichotomy that's happening that I'm noticing. I think the challenge that we face as human beings is that we have a spiritual and a physical nature that are kind of at odds with one another, and even though in many ways they're very much in alignment with one another. Here's how I see the distinction. Whenever I have an intuitive hit about something, if I have this idea, this story that it's a wrong thing to do, that's my ego mind. That's my ego mind, which is here to protect me and to keep me safe and so forth. And it is probably thinking about something way back in the past that happened that may have involved me trusting my intuition that got me into trouble. But the fact that I may have gotten into trouble by supposedly following my intuition way back in the past doesn't mean that I'm going to get into trouble every time I follow my intuition. But that's what the ego mind thinks, and it warns me about these things. So the ego mind is constantly going back into the past, finding stuff that happened and saying, hey, look at this one, you better watch out because this is going to happen again. So it's projecting the past into the future. Meanwhile, my knowing is right here. My intuition is right here, right now. And it always is there. And that's coming from my spiritual nature. And so what we're trying to do here is we're trying to explain things using our logical brains, which, by the way, happen to be largely controlled. I hate to say that word, but, well, let's say influenced by the ego mind, okay? And as long as if you can remain aware of the fact that you've got an ego mind that's functioning in this real physical world, and you allow yourself to have that ego mind with all of its thoughts, feelings, emotions, and stuff that goes on, then you can simply listen to it, allow it to have its moment of speaking, and say, thank you for that wisdom. I understand you're trying to keep me safe. I'm totally grateful that you're there for me. And I've got this covered, and this is the choice I'm going to make. Because I am a spiritual being having a human experience and not the other way around. So if you can get into that, then, Melissa was talking about having some confidence in choices. Well, if you can come to that place of being totally in tune with your spirit, this knowing that Stephanie was talking about, that inner GPS, okay, I think you will, in fact, be connecting to your soul, to the essence of who you really are. And from that place, every choice you make will be a true choice of that you can be proud of. I believe that wholeheartedly. It's only when we allow the ego mind to have its way with us and to, overpower our choices and to allow fear to come into play and, manipulate our thinking and so forth, that's when things really get screwed up. So my invitation is, don't try and kill the ego mind or do anything nasty or anything. That's just violence applied to something. Instead, try to love the ego mind. Try to treat it like a little child that just wants to get a nice big hug from a loving adult. That's all it is. and it'll slowly quiet down on its own. That's been my experience. You guys have heard me say this before, so.
Beautifully said. Yeah. So opening ourselves up to such a broad level of choices, with ego, mind, spiritual, conscious, subconscious, and maybe choosing to be present with all of that, because that is the fabric of our human experience. And I love the gap that you share with a quote from Viktor Frankl, that in that gap there is the space for maybe that empowering choice that just is.
Yeah, I think that space is the space where my true essence actually lives, my true source, my true soul. And that's why it's really important to pause and listen in and check in with that part.
There was I would like to share one more story, because I think this is a big one for me personally, and maybe others have been through this too. So it was over 2 years ago, I chose to leave my marriage, which is a very loving marriage. And I knew that that was the thing for me to do about 3 years ago. And so while I knew in myself that this was the thing, this was the aligned thing, and I'm using that word like beyond like good and bad, it really was, this is just the thing that I know my soul knows to choose. I had a lot of emotions about it, lots and lots.
Yeah.
And I didn't like it. I didn't like that this was the choice that I was making, and yet I knew that this was the choice. And so what I did was stay in it until I knew, not only did I know, but I knew that I knew, and I was clear.
That's
because
great.
I had lots of doubts. And I don't think that that was what I had to do, but it's something I've been playing with and noticing and learning more about. Like, what if I can't be wrong, for one? What if I couldn't be wrong? What would I choose? And then if I'm not sure, it's okay to sit with it and let it be there until I get clear. But if I find that I'm just sitting there and sitting there and sitting there and sitting there, it might be a fun experiment, or maybe an uncomfortable experiment, to just try choosing things and giving yourself permission. Just choose. Just start choosing, and notice how that is for you with things
Right.
that seem of lesser importance, or with everything for a period of time. What if just for a week you let yourself choose whatever you know, without needing proof of it being right or wrong, and just notice what happens and how is it for you? What do you learn from that?
Yeah, that's beautiful, Stephanie. I appreciate that. And I think it's a great lesson for all of us, because often we have to sit in discomfort long enough to understand that our truth can emerge from it. And I apologize that my dog is now speaking up at this moment.
That's right. He just has a lot to say about this. He's very passionate. Yeah.
All right, folks. Does either of you have anything more you want to say about this topic before we close out? I think it's been a great conversation.
Yeah, I learned a lot about the essence of being in the space, emotionally, physically, spiritually, of choosing to choose and how to apply that. And for me, it's an ongoing life journey. And I can certainly say at this place in time that we were at, I am very aware of my heightened request from the universe to really be present to everything that is out there for me to move into with choice. That's a big request, and one that I'm choosing to dive into for all the beautiful possibilities.
Yeah. Thank you, Nancy. Stephanie, anything for you you'd like to close with?
Just really a big thank you to everyone, wherever you are, for participating, for listening, for talking, for sharing, and for being willing to engage about this topic of choosing and showing up. For showing up and choosing whatever it is that you're choosing. I'm really grateful for that because it gives me the inspiration to keep doing the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and I want to thank both you, Nancy and Stephanie, for being here today. And I want to thank everybody who came on the show and listened. I want to thank you for choosing to be here, for doing something important for yourself.
Yeah.
Because that's really what this is all about. Self-empowerment is something that we choose for ourselves. And the more we empower ourselves, the more we grow. The more we grow, the bigger we become, the more magnificent we become. And that's really what we're here to help with. So I want to thank you for being here. I want to remind you that we will be back on May 12th with another episode of Soul Empowerment. And I want to remind you that over the next day or so, you are going to receive an email with a request for a review. And my hope is that you'll go in, give us a review right from your heart, right from your soul. And if you can, choose to give us 5 stars, because that really helps us to spread the word and get more people to join us. So thank you all. Have a great week, a great month, a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.